Welcome back to the Painting Coach, and on the channel today we're going to be talking about the question I get asked the most in all the comments on my videos. Which brush do I use? It's probably the most important tool when it comes to painting. And as I was putting this video together, I thought I'll pull some out, and I've got absolutely stacks of paintbrushes. Some which are completely destroyed through use, some which are brand new. So rather than just talk about what I use in terms of my preferred brush, I thought we'll talk about brushes in general, and we talk a little bit about what brushes we might want to consider getting to paint miniatures, which is obviously the title of the video. So hopefully you'll get some good value content from this. Let's head over to the palette and see what we've got. So the number one comment I get asked when it comes to my videos is what paintbrush do I use. So this is what I use for the majority of what I paint. So it's a Winsor and Newton Series 7. This is a size 1. I sometimes use a size 0 and a 00. But that's by the by, because ultimately the brush that you choose and you feel most comfortable with may be a different brush altogether. There's loads of great manufacturers out there. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what makes a good brush, what to look for, as well as the other kind of brushes that we use when it comes to painting miniatures. So in terms of what we look for in a good brush, we want a good tip. So this here's the tip. So we want that to hold that tip when it's got paint on it, because that's what gives us the ability to paint really fine lines. This part here is called the belly. So we want a decent sized belly in the brush, because that's what holds paint, it holds moisture. If you haven't got a very big belly, the paint's going to die or dry even rather quickly. And then you've got the ferrule here, which is what holds all the shape, and we want to keep everything out of this ferrule. So don't dip your brush so far that you get paint in there. And of course we have the handle as well. So that's what makes a good brush. That's what we look for. Let's have a little look about how this works in practicality, as well as the different brushes that we might use for these jobs. So let's talk about this in practice. So I'm going to take that Winsor and Newton brush, and I've filled it up with just some black paint. And this is why having a good belly is important, because as you'll see, as you drag it along, you can see it pretty much goes right till the end. And the other thing that we talked about with the Winsor and Newton is having a good tip. So we can get nice thin lines like that. So that's what I'd say a medium-sized brush. One of the other brushes I'm really enjoying using at the moment is the Squidmar brushes from his recent Kickstarter. I remember him saying that these were Da Vinci brushes. So let's look at what we can get with a nice big brush with a full reservoir or well. You know, look at that. We've got plenty of paint in there. And this is a much bigger brush with a bigger well, but it's actually also got a very good point. So let's have a look at how thin a line we can draw with this brush. And you can see at the start it's a fairly thin line. It's just the extra pressure I put on towards the end that actually causes it to go out. So if we paint it in comparison with the Winsor and Newton line, we can see that actually, because the brush has got a really good point, it matches that Winsor and Newton. So you can see the difference there between two brushes with, what I'd say is a standard size brush for painting miniatures, which is the Winsor and Newton Series 7 size 1, and the Squidmar, which is a much bigger brush, but has a similar point, but a much bigger belly. So let's look at the other extreme, and this is a Winsor and Newton. It's a size 0, but this is what's called a miniature brush. So you can see there's hardly any belly in this brush. So let's have a look at how much paint we get out. Wow, hardly any paint at all. So let's clean that brush off, and let's then go back and have a little look at the tip of the brush and see what kind of fine line we can get with it. So we can get a fine line, and actually, now that I've thinned that paint quite a lot, we can get a decent amount out of it. But ultimately, it's going to take you a long time to do that. So that's why I want to highlight the difference between a good size belly, a good point, and what is, if you're not careful, the wrong brush to buy, which is the Winsor and Newton Series miniature. And it's miniature because it's got this really small head on it. The belly's all inside the ferrule. Remember, we don't want paint inside the ferrule. So if you're looking to buy a Winsor and Newton, avoid the miniature brush. I bought these by mistake. I occasionally use them for eyes. But what you want to do is you want the larger brush, which has got the tip, decent sized belly. So that explains why the belly and the tip are important. Now let's have a look at the different kind of brushes we can use. So I wasn't lying when I said I have a lot of brushes, and there's a huge selection here from different manufacturers. Some are in absolutely horrendous condition, some are brand new. So let's talk a little bit about what I've got, the different kinds of brush. And we'll start off with this big one here. And the reason we've got this one is quite simple. Sometimes I leave my models out, which means that they need a bit of a dusting from time to time. And I find that this brush is best for it. So the first category of brush is dry brushes. So dry brushes are great for adding some detail quickly, especially over areas that have got a lot of raised surfaces. I do dry brushing quite a bit in some of my basing videos, so there's a link to one of those just above, so you can see what that actually looks like. And what I tend to do is I use a lot of makeup brushes. So these brushes here, they're all makeup brushes. You can see they need to go clean. And the reason I use the makeup brushes, they tend to have softer bristles than perhaps something like this, which is one of the new Citadel ones, which, you know, they're pretty good in terms of the softness, but these just help you get a better blend sometimes with when you're doing the dry brushing, as opposed to sort of the harsh ones. And you may see artist opus have got like a round-headed one, which is kind of similar to these to the makeup brushes. And I tend to use makeup brushes quite a lot when it comes to dry brushing because they're really cheap, and you can get them for a few quid for quite a, I think there was 20 in the pack I bought for about £5 on Amazon. So it's really cost effective in terms of buying these brushes. So these are the dry brushes I use. I use makeup brushes. You can use proper dry brushes. This is a synthetic one. Some companies, such as Redgrass Games, they produce a dry brush. Army Painter produce a dry brush. Obviously, Games Workshop do as well. So these are dry brushes. I tend to stick with makeup brushes, but it's always good to have a dry brush in your armoury, because when you've got a dry brush, if you've got any texture at all, you can just get it done looking really good really quickly. Next up, I've got what I call my Ganky brushes. So these are the really old damaged brushes. You can see they're in a heck of a state. And these essentially are for taking the paint from a pot, if you're using Citadel paints, and putting it on the palette and mixing water in. And you can see this is stained from all the paint water in the palette. You can also use these for a little bit of stippling. You can see, I'm using these medium shade brushes that I've had. I think I had them free with the Conquest series, and this is just a cheap one that comes as part of a pack. The other thing I use these for is putting PVA glue down on any bases, or also spreading out. If you've got texture paint, you can use it like a spatula, or you can use these really old brushes. And essentially, when a brush comes to the end of its life, I hardly ever throw any away. I just use them and abuse them to keep some value in them, in terms of, like I said, transferring paint, mixing paint, PVA glue, stone, all that kind of stuff. Next up, I've got some synthetic brushes. So these are flat brushes, and you can see this is just a cheap brush. And you can see, just as I rub my fingers through it there, that the quality is not fantastic. But the Green Stuff World ones are a little bit better, but I use these for oil. So if I'm using oil washes, or if I want to use oil to do a blend, these are perfect for that. Now, if you're just starting out miniature painting and you don't worry too much about oil washes and things like that, you can work your way into those. If you're coming from an art background, or you're coming from an oil painting background, then of course you probably know more about them than I do, so you can get straight involved. And all I've got for that is I've got this one, which runs the oil into the recesses, and then the flat-headed ones, which help to clean the oil up if I need it. It's also handy for weathering. The second category of synthetic brushes are what I'd probably term my painting brushes, rather than my kind of oil brushes. And you can see I've just got some of the new Citadel STC brushes. These are really nice. They've got good snap on them. They keep their point okay. Obviously not when I'm running your finger through it. I've got some Redgrass Games ones here. So I've got a small one and a big one. This I use for kind of some base coating stuff. And again, this is another really sort of art shop cheap. And you can see that the quality's not fantastic on that, but it does do a job. And what I would say about synthetic brushes is use synthetic brushes when you're using metallic paint, because if you use your nice sable hairbrushes with metallic paint, the metallic paint will destroy them, and you won't get as much life out of them. So these are my painting synthetics that I use for metallics, and we'll have a look at the other brushes I use for some of the more finishing jobs, and then we'll do a little comparison between synthetic and natural hair. And here are my natural hair brushes. So I've got some brand new Rosemary and Co's, which I've never used on this side, and then I've got the Squidmar brushes, which a patron very kindly donated. I've got my Winsor and Newton miniature, which I bought by mistake, but is still useful for painting eyes. So again, I've always got plenty of natural hair brushes because I do go through them. At the end of the day, a paintbrush is a tool, and yes, you should look after them, because if you look after them, they look after you, but ultimately they will expire at a point. So it's really important that you've got spares there, especially if you don't live close to an art shop. I live nowhere near an art shop, so I need to order mine, so it's always good to have some spares in stock. In fact, I think that cap is off this brush. So keep your brush caps as well, because it helps protect things. So that's my natural brushes. So let's have a look at what's best. Is a natural brush or a synthetic brush best when it comes to painting miniatures? So let's have a go with the new synthetic STC small layer brush. Let's have a look at how that works. Actually, the tip on it's okay, so you can get a decent line there. And then if you push down more, the brush starts to get out of shape. So that's not a bad result with that one. However, the red grass games, and like I said, if you see my painting videos, you'll see that when I'm painting metallics, I tend to use a red handle brush. So this is the red grass games one. And you can see it gets a good initial start, but unless you really fill the brush up, and this is a kind of an older brush, doesn't transfer out to that particularly well. So bristles on this brush are probably fairly worn as well, because I've been using it for metallics. And the last one, we'll try the bigger red grass games brush. So again, not as easy to get a point on this bigger brush, so you can see why I use that for base coating. So in comparison then, if we look at what we were able to achieve with these thin lines and the first thin line we did, actually there's much about muchness in terms of how thin the line is, but what's really important and why I tend to use the sable hairbrushes, the natural hairbrushes more, is it's a lot better in terms of the continuous amount of paint that you get rolling through them. You can see here that actually it rolls out and it's quite thin as well. So actually that's why I tend to prefer sable over synthetic. Now, there's absolutely nothing stopping you using synthetic brushes. And indeed, I know someone like Sam Lenz, who's a Golden Daemon winner, he uses synthetic brushes for loads of his work. He's got a really good video up with Unglatter and Tabletop Minions, which I will link in the description. So you can go and have a look at and get his thoughts on a brush. But he's, like I said, he's a Golden Daemon winner, and he uses synthetic brushes for 90 or 80 to 90% of the work he does. And let's have a look at these really cheap synthetic brushes. Now, you can get a good point on these, a good tip, but the reservoir is not particularly good. So because that reservoir is not particularly good, even though it's quite big, you can see the paint is drying on those bristles. So these really cheap brushes, they're not particularly great. So, you know, they're a couple of pounds for 7 or 10 brushes. You can afford to experiment with them, but ultimately they're not the best thing. So I've shown you on a piece of paper. Let's have a little look on a miniature, because ultimately this is a miniature painting channel, and then we'll summarise and wrap up. Let's take this Indomitus Lieutenant and let's see what kind of difference there is in terms of applying the paint. So let's paint his robes. So I'm starting off with a synthetic brush from Games Workshop, and actually that's going on really nicely and really smoothly on there. So in terms of how the natural bristle brush compares, you know, it's very, very similar in terms of how it goes on. It just looks a bit more awkward because I'm not painting it's in a particularly clever way because of the angle I'm holding him. So, you know, even applying paint onto the miniature, a much about muchness, I'd say, in terms of natural and synthetic. So let's have a look if there's any difference when we layer up, Otherwise, we're happy, we'll make some conclusions. So let's look at layering up. And again, this is just bleach bone or Lazandri dust base with some bleach bone in there. So you can see this is perhaps where the synthetic brush isn't quite as good as the natural head brush in terms of keeping that really good tip. Could just be me as a bad artist, but we'll push on and we'll have a go at doing it with the natural brush as well. So this is the Squidmar brush, and actually you can see you can get much kind of sharper edges on there. I'm not painting this to be particularly blended, it's just a kind of a demonstration more than anything. Let's go in for that lighter colour then for the kind of the final highlight. The pure bleach bone down there. I've got too much water on my brush, which is, I guess, one of the issues of having a big belly brush, is the moisture can be a bit of an obstruction. So let's just have a look if I can use the smaller synthetic brush to get some decent highlights in there. Make sure you got a good tip on the brush. Yeah, it's not too bad actually. So the new Games Workshop brushes have come a long way. The one thing I would say, these are brand new, so I don't know how long they're going to last in terms of the longevity on them. But certainly there's not too much of a difference in there between the kind of sable hair and the natural hair. I tend to prefer the natural. I just think it gives you a nice, better, smoother coat. But like I said, there's absolutely no reason you can't use synthetics on there. So, like I said, it really does come down to you in terms of your brush choice. I hope you've learned something from this. Let's wrap things up and we will catch up again. So there we go. That's what I consider when I'm thinking about paintbrushes. I hope it's given you some food for thought. It's not always necessarily about the most expensive brush or the brand name of the day. It's about what works for you, what you prefer based on your style. Now, as I said in the video, I tend to use the Winsor and Newton Series 7. However, I really like the Squidmar brushes, so I may look at getting some Da Vinci brushes in the future because they've got that nice full belly and that nice pointy tip. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, it would mean the world to me if you'd leave a like and a comment down below. It really does help me make sure that I'm creating the kind of content that you want to see. If you do want to support me, you can do so using the links down there as well. You can find all the types of brushes I've spoken about. There's also my link to my Patreon where you get exclusive access to me through our Discord. You get an exclusive monthly live frequently asked questions show, again hosted by myself, and lots of other little bit of exclusive content, and I do the occasional giveaway in there as well. There's also the link for Goblin Gaming where you can get up to 20% off all your wargaming needs, not just Warhammer, all kinds of things. So I really hope you've enjoyed the video. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.